do it. Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Pierce-Lolo. You're in the design talk. I'm the design lead at a company called FarmLogs. We were founded in 2012. We build an agriculture system platform for farmers to understand everything that's going on in their fields. So remotely sense data that comes out of tractors, manually input data from farmers. We deal with rainfall, soil, and basically everything farmers need to know to make good decisions about their crops, so they don't waste too much money on what they're growing, and so they can make good decisions about what happens on their farm and keep their business, which is really important because a ton of the country is covered by farmland and has massive environmental impact. And if you like to eat, this is a really important industry. About a third of farmers in the United States have signed up for our product, and it's only 3 years old, so we've had amazing growth. I'm going to talk a little bit about design, because that's my role in the head of design. I'm going to talk a little bit about startups and just sort of what I think they are, which might be slightly different from what other people here have, and maybe not. I'm going to talk about our design process a little bit. And I'm going to sort of wrap up with some stuff that I guess I wish people had told me when I was sort of in your shoes not that long ago. And to do that, I'm going to sort of talk about my story with the company altogether. I was, in undergrad, I studied human-computer interaction, and I sort of made like HTML and CSS during college. I wasn't really interested in startups. The whole startup thing that you guys have right now is so amazing because it just wasn't a thing when I was really in college. I'm 29, just so it gives you an idea. I found FarmLogs about 3 years, about 3 years after I graduated. First I want to talk a little bit about, so what a startup is. Obviously you guys have found this and you're interested in startups and tech in general. Startups, this is the way that Paul Graham describes them, I think. Paul Graham's the head of Y Combinator, or used to be the head of Y Combinator, which is the organization that our company came up through. Startups are, small companies, and they're also tech companies very generally. But that's not really the fundamental thing that makes a startup a startup. A startup is a startup because it's focused on growing some metric over all else, usually the number of people that use it. And it does that pretty much to sacrifice, and it sacrifices pretty much everything else, including revenue, which is usually a very important metric in business, to get more users. It sacrifices a lot of the best practices, the things that we understand about businesses, just in order to grow. It's not necessarily the best business model for a company. In fact, it's just a tool, a set of things that you can do. So I'm gonna definitely support startups. I work for startups and I love startups. I think they're amazing. I think you should all work for one. But it's not necessarily the only way to go when you're looking at different companies. Just because a company is small doesn't mean it's a startup. Just because a company is a tech company definitely doesn't mean it's a startup. Just because they don't have venture capital funding doesn't mean that they're actually not doing this. And just because they have venture capital funding doesn't mean that they're successful in growing, which is the number one thing that startups have to do. That's not going to be there. The actual day-to-day of hitting that growth is basically you have to build things as quickly as possible and ship them. And one of those things you sacrifice early on, especially, is the normal quality checks. Often we don't have that as much anymore, but this is all about making product as fast as possible, getting it out into the world, and learning things, measuring what you learn, which is super important, and then repeating that cycle over and over again. It's basically a bunch of these little tiny experiments. And if you're a researcher, you can probably know that you basically have a hypothesis. You build a test to test the hypothesis, you analyze that result, and it starts to do that over and over and over again as fast as possible, thrashing as quickly as possible so that you have an understanding of what is going on. Basically, businesses exist in a world where they understand how something works. Ford has these organizations so that Ford can sell cars in a certain way. And startups are a place where none of that exists, and it all has to be built based on what actually works in the real world. And so basically, you have to do this over and over and over again. And if you're in research, imagine a world where a sample size of one was super totally fine, and anecdotal data that you just sort of picked up from somewhere was a great way to say, yeah, we understand this, and we're moving on. It's really all about speed in order to hit that growth. And so a lot of the things go by the wayside. This is all stuff that I learned when I joined startup, when I was 25. This is kind of fun. So Kirsten's our head of talent. This is an email I showed her earlier. This is the cover letter that I sent to Jesse and Brad when I saw them post on Hacker News before I joined FarmLogs. It basically talks about what I'm interested in, and it's kind of too long to read right now, but what I think is interesting about it is that for one, it doesn't have a resume attached to it, which is probably a mistake, but it worked fine. I didn't actually have to submit a resume for 6 months until after I got hired.
It's not a mistake.
What I'm focusing on here is that I build shit. I do stuff on the side, not just for my company. I love working with a team and thrashing around, and I have an interest in what these people are doing. Like my vision is aligned with what these people are doing. After I got the job offer, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. It was actually really easy. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to work for FarmLogs, but the thing that people told me when I was trying to figure out what I should do, was to balance the risk and reward of working for a startup. That might be the message you get later today. Basically, the risk is that most startups fail pretty quickly, and I just so happened that ours didn't, but others do, and there's really no way to know up front if it's going to fail or not. That's the whole point of the experiment, right? The whole company's an experiment. And the reward is ostensibly that you're going to be like rich and famous one day. And I think that balance is total bullshit, and we'll talk a little bit about later. But that's what I thought I was getting into. This is a picture of FarmLogs in 2012. We went to Costa Rica for 2 weeks on a work trip. This is the only time we went to the beach. We just sat in front of our computers all day and market software. But it's cool because it has Jesse next to me. I'm the one with the sweater. And then Brad on the left. Those are the two co-founders. Jesse and Brad went to high school together, and Chris on the far right also went to high school with them. This is the next year, about 6 months later. We've added a few people. We keep taking pictures, but we're squinting in the sunlight. I don't know if that trend ended. This is us the next year. Look who that is, right there. A familiar face. He's sitting across the table. And Wilson's there too. He's also a brown guy. Akshay is another one of our interns who came back twice to work with us. And the rest of everybody else most of these people are full-timers. And then this is us this year. And you can see we've added some more. We got a dog. Well, we got somebody who had a dog, which is awesome. So the team has grown a lot. We've had a lot of good success. This is Hacker News the other day. We are we even up here? Number 3. Oh, there you go. 1 of 3 farms is using FarmLogs, which is pretty cool. And this is our CEO giving a presentation at TechCrunch just dropped the other day. This is taken like 2 days ago. So that's sort of what a startup is. I'm going to talk a little bit about how design fits into a startup. I actually drew this chart. It started as literally something I was only trying to draw like really important lines between the teams, so you can get a sense of like how it's laid out, and it turned into a complete bird's nest. That's completely hard to read. There's nothing really to read here, but what's important is that everybody talks to each other. There's an important team missing from here, which is customer success, which is the people who talk to our customers every day. Most of these teams didn't exist when we have 3 people, or at least they were done by one person, like on a part-time basis. The people that our design team talks with mostly are web and mobile, who actually build the things that we design. And we talk a lot with product management, which is sort of the business sense in product. And of course, we deal a lot with marketing and then data science and everybody, obviously, we support. What we call design at FarmLogs is product design. It doesn't mean that we design vacuum cleaners. It means that there's a lot of different pieces of design in the digital world. So this might be obvious to you guys. I don't know how familiar you are with design, but we incorporate visual design, innovation, user experience, user research, information architecture, etc. If you're going to be Googling about this is a word that's come up in the past 2 years. User experience, one of the top right, is probably the most important one. It's also the one that I think is like the most loaded term that doesn't really mean anything, but basically it means that we're responsible for the experience you use when you're using the user interface of the product from start to end. And that means that when a designer works for us, they take it all the way through. We're going to actually show you how that works here. But just know that the designer doesn't mean that each of these steps we show in our process is not just something that somebody's job is. Designers at a startup often have very broad sets of skills, and we'll talk about why in a few minutes. Talking about user experience, this is a book called by Christopher Alexander, who's one of my favorite dudes, and it talks a little bit about design in the abstract. So if you're familiar with design and you like making things that are really visually pretty and things that sort of just like feel really good and just like animate just so and feel heavy when they should feel heavy and feel very light when they're light and are stunningly beautiful to look at. That's awesome, and we actually do a lot of that, but that's not the main thing that design does. Christopher Alexander's definition of design, this is heavily paraphrasing. Basically what he says is there's a context, which is just the world. And in the classic design analogy of designing a tea kettle, the context is a stove. It's morning. There's a very tired, sleepy person who wants a cup of tea. What form can we suit that context to that is going to be the best fit, have the most fitness? And so that really means when you're designing tea kettles, you really have to understand the kitchen, the person using the tea kettle, if there are little kids running around under their feet. You're not designing for the most beautiful tea kettle in the world necessarily, although that would be great if you could, but it doesn't mean you can just take like a beautiful painting and stick it on a tea kettle. Obviously, you're not designing for the most performant tea kettle either. You're not just building a water heater. You're designing something that balances all those in a really elegant way. And something that he really talks about on this book a lot is balancing a lot of different factors. In agriculture, you might imagine there's a lot of different things that need to be pulled together to make something work. And so this is a great resource. I think there's a lot of other people who talk about this. This is like what user experience is generally. And if anybody has questions about sort of the other half of design, like the really feel good, pretty stuff, I'm happy to talk about that a little bit later. This is how it sort of comes out in the world for us. There's about 1 million ideas that we have. There's a lot of really cool things we want to do. And anybody here is probably really familiar with the idea that great design is simple, right? And so you have to come up with something that's really, really small. And a lot of what we do is building a system of work so that we can take something that's really awesome. Like, what if we could run every farm in the world from our phone with sub-meter accuracy so that everybody can eat amazing food all the time, and somehow build something that actually gets people to sign up and get growth with a team of like 3 people. What's important about this is that the bigger the funnel at the top, the more ideas you have coming in, the more successful you'll be. So as a designer, I'm going to encourage you to think really, really broad, especially in startups when you don't know what's going on, to think like really wide, and don't make as few assumptions as possible at that early stage. What's also important is that the end result is tiny, is minuscule, because you don't have time to build anything. So the quicker you can get all this down to this, and the bigger you go and the smaller you go, the better. That's what this whole like design process we're about to talk about is there to help you do. The thing that does that is purpose of design. That's like the overall theme. I mean, if we had to take away one thing from the process part of this talk, is to understand what you're doing, to write it down, to share it. There's going to be a lot of times in this process when you're going to think, like, wouldn't it be cool if, or oh, I just had an idea, why don't we just, and if you really define what you're trying to accomplish up front, like that experiment, saying this is what we're going to do, and then test against it. This is something I wish somebody would have told me a long time ago instead of just running on like, pure genius, which not everybody has, and I certainly don't. So, this is a picture of me with a better beard back in the day. This is only about a year ago when we didn't really have a lot of process. We're going to walk through like our design process now. These are a bunch of things we wanted to do on a wall behind me in our old office. The process we used to have was have a cool idea, think it would be really cool, and then be agile, so that means get something done really quickly. So get out a piece of paper and start sketching awesome designs, and hope that they're all awesome and everybody loves them. And just get something on paper as quickly as possible. And I'm going to try to convince you that that's actually the worst way to go about it, and still make it agile. This is like the before picture when everything was a mess and we had a million things to go on and do. And now we're going to talk about sort of the structure that helps you define that design process. Process is like a really scary word for designers a lot of times, or for anybody, because it just is overloaded. There's just so much that gets in your way, and that's the whole reason you join a startup, right? So you don't have to deal with it. But if you are designers, I think this should give you like a little bit of insight into like what actually the day-to-day life is like, besides just make awesome designs at a startup. It also helps you not have surprises later, so that things don't jump out of the blue and bite you in the ass when you're trying to make something awesome. It helps you set expectations with people. It helps your creativity, and when you're just having a day when you're not coming up with the most amazing things in the world, it will still let you do great work. This is a screenshot from a document I have that is ever evolving. These are some like little tiny patterns we do. Christopher Alexander, the guy from the book back there, was really big on a book called Pattern Language, which defines sort of patterns for architecture in a similar way. These are super casual. They're all really common in the design world. These are things that start a project, Um, this is something we do as we work. We'll go into these in a little bit more detail. And this is sort of like how the end of the process works and how to interface with all the rest of the teams. We're still trying to burn through this as quickly as possible. Notice each of these patterns is really small. They're in very loose order, and each one is optional, so people we work with don't actually have to go through all of them and execute. Some people say that design is process completely. I don't necessarily think that's true, but some of this stuff is really important to do just for the reasons I said. You don't want to have to overload yourself with process. What we've tried to do is build in just enough process to help ourselves accomplish what we need to accomplish, and then no more whatsoever. Otherwise, we're not going to achieve our goals. So, the first thing we do is we talk to people. Usually, when I have this conversation, there's two kinds of designers. There's people who come from like the visual world and the engineering world, and I usually have to. This is like where I came from, and what I wish I could have done to myself is just like grab them by the shoulders and say, "You're not talking to people. You're not talking to your users. You cannot define a purpose for what you're doing if you have no idea what these people actually want." And I know that you think you know what they want, because I thought I knew what farmers wanted. It's not true at all. You're going to be completely surprised. And if your goal is to build something that you think is like a beautiful, shiny structure that nobody uses, don't talk to anybody. If you want to build something that actually hits growth, you have to talk to people. There's another kind of designer that I talk to when we do this, the kind of designer that comes from a UX or research background. And I usually have to sort of do the same thing to them that says, stop talking to so many people. You're doing way too much research. And you have to actually get pen to paper and make something, because a lot of the learning process is through making. But do yourself a favor and sort of like self-sort your, like, which side of that you fall on. I definitely fell on the side of not enough research. There's a lot of patterns out there to help you do this. Honestly, all you have to do is just show up at the person that you're trying to solve a problem for. And instead of asking them what they want in a product, just ask them what their problems are, and then when they tell you, say why. And when they tell you, say why, and just act like a 4-year-old the whole time. Say why, and eventually you'll get to the root of the problem, which is then your job to solve it. This is sort of the next step in our process. This is a very small workflow. This is something we already shipped. I was going to show something else, but I think it's not something I can show yet. It's just basically a logical abstraction of how this stuff works. This is a very small piece of a workflow that we did for our current training feature, so that farmers can know how much rain is falling on their fields recently. You can see that we have actually gone through and solved a problem. If you ignore the UI here, you can see that we're actually knowing what we're showing them, and we're showing them, and we know how we're showing it, and all the logic has been worked out in advance. We're building another thing right now for nutrients. It's the same thing, and it's about this times like 10 or 20, and it was something that a designer worked with in about a day or two, and we go through many iterations of these workflows to say, okay, if I'm a user, I start here. What am I going to see? What is the decision that's going to help me get to that next spot? This is most important to do before you do your user interface work, because the user interface work is going to be directly based off of this. And if everything goes well, every step along your process, you know that you're building something directly based off of the learning you did last time. So if you do your research and you understand the world in which the person who has a problem lives, this isn't going to be that hard to do, because you just know this is really just the abstract version of the problem you're trying to solve. Similarly, the wireframe, which is the next step in our process, which we didn't always do but is really important, I think, is just a next step of that workflow. These are wireframes for a thing that allows farmers to manage the nutrients that are going on their field that we just built, and I don't think it's shipped yet. But this is one that I did. Wireframes are really low fidelity, which just means that they don't have any color, and if somebody puts a color in a wireframe, I usually advise them to get it out of there, because people tend to think that if there's color, it's something that should be evaluated as a visual design. All you're trying to do here is figure out the interactions and the layout of information. So if you think about Gestalt, what I'm focusing on where my eye is going, what I understand, the copy I'm reading, and whether or not something is even in a modal box as it was, or if it's in line, for example, which is how this window used to be. The next step that we have is a visual design. This is probably the worst example I could have grabbed, but I just grabbed it really quick. This is a visual design for somebody adding the geometry to their field, going into the phone, and on a really small device, like really pinpointing with high accuracy points on a geolocation. This is what people tend to think of when they think of design or product design in a startup, like getting the rectangles right, getting the arrows right. But I got to tell you, this is maybe like a third to a quarter of what we do. All the other stuff in the beginning and stuff I'm going to show you afterwards is more important. And then, like I said, logically, you take that step and you go right into something that is executable. This is the code. This is just some random screenshot I took from the grunt task or a gulp task I'm running on our app, and some random CSS3 animation definitions. If you don't know how to write HTML and CSS, just please learn like immediately. It's really not that hard. It takes some time, like anything, but this is something that would definitely a requirement for me to join FarmLogs. I used to build all the front end stuff, and if you're interested in a startup, being actually able to build the thing is like fundamentally important. There's a lot of discussion about whether or not designers need to learn how to code, and my take on it is if you're a designer in a startup and you want to be good, yes, those things aren't necessarily true, then like you don't. But this is the medium in which we work. We build software. It's not that sexy to say, but if you want to work in this area, this is a really empowering thing for you as a designer. And it's one of those things where the more you learn, the more important it is. It's not like you have to be an amazing coder for it to be useful. Anything you can do to improve your area, your literacy around code is like going to change your career. I'm not even joking. I think HTML, CSS is the starting place. If you're really looking for cool things to prototype in, Meteor is amazing. I know A16Z is here. There's a sponsor of Meteor. I use Framer a lot for a lot of high definition stuff. That's more of an advanced tool. Another really important thing that we do once we build it is get feedback. This actually happens throughout the entire design process, but we take the wireframes, the workflows, and everything and share it in a tool called InVision, which allows you to post comments on the designs as they come out. It's been really a game changer for us. There's a lot of different ways to get feedback, but when you're getting feedback, the advice I'd have for you is to get it early and often as much as you can, but design the feedback that you want by design the feedback itself rather, by asking the person that you're getting feedback from for the kind of feedback that you want, whether it be visual, I want help on this workflow, I want to know if this looks good, and then providing them the right fidelity of the design so that they can actually give you the feedback that is useful to you. So don't give them a visual design and say, I want help on this interaction. If you're looking for the interaction piece, I think make it black and white so that they really know what they're looking for. And tailor the kind of feedback you want from people to their expertise, because different people are still different things. Next is usability testing. I didn't even pay for the software, so it's got a big watermark on it, but it's a screen recording software. This is a part of our app, and I'm going through a farmer and having him add something to his field so I can see whether or not he knows how to do it. Usability testing is a pretty fundamental part of the design process, and companies learn a lot more about it. Just like anything, there's some fundamental things. You're just trying to actually see if users can know how to use it, and don't spend too much more time than that. Any more time you spend is just likely to make you not do it, and it is important to do, and we still need to do a lot more of it. This is stuff I was talking about. Tools.subtraction.com. Subtraction is Coy Vin's website. We use work for the New York Times in this case, as I do. And he did a great survey a couple months ago about what tools are being used in the design world. Design changes all the time. I said we're product designers, but when I got hired at FarmLogs, I didn't call myself a product designer. That wasn't even a thing. So it's kind of important to keep up on the latest stuff because things like InVision are changing the game like every 6 months. Tools.subtraction.com is a great resource for now that shows what the tools that people are using well are. It's basically what we do: paper, whiteboard, sketch. There's a lot more to the design process. There's a lot more things that we discover. We actually just added one. Nobody reads anything. So just if your design depends on a lot of text, I advise you to figure out how you can communicate it. Show don't tell is another one of my favorites. That actually a friend of mine told me once, and completely unrelated conversation. These are some of our pictures about the room we have for design. These are some of the things you just saw. We have a space where this Kelsey, one of our designers in the bottom left there, looking at some of the stuff we work with. And this is my desk here. That's Kelsey's and that's Jason's desk at FarmLogs. These are some cool patterns, but they're definitely not the patterns you should use because they're already outdated for us. They took us a long time to get. And what I really want to just make sure that you guys do is figure out a way that you can sort of design the way that you design. Just like startups are an experiment, you try to figure out if this company is going to work or not by testing it and then measuring the results. You want to do the same thing for your product. Is the product working or not? Test it and measure the results. Is any individual feature working or not? Test it and measure the results. Same thing for your team and the design process itself. So test whether or not your design process is working. Every time you do something, is this something that allows us to meet our goals, which is move fast, get growth, and get the right feedback at the right time. Just focus on doing it really lightweight and quickly, and write it down so that everybody has a shared knowledge of what you're working on. Talk a little bit about the design industry. We covered this already. This is some random picture I got like 2 hours ago I put in here. I think it shows how much people are trying to explain what these positions mean and how they're doing a kind of okay job, but also failing at it because I don't understand exactly what the Darth Vader is doing. But we're talking about product design, product management, UX design. This is clearly from UX Min, which is a great tool, and some sort of like vague ideas about what these people are doing. This is an awesome time to be a designer because it's in extreme demand. People need great designers so bad. It's gonna be, if you can like demonstrate an amazing portfolio and have great experience, like people will crawl over themselves to get to you. It's an amazing time because there's so much more to learn about what design is. Like I said, it's changed in the past 6 months. It's also kind of a terrible time because there's a lot of these weird assumptions about what design should be doing, and you can sort of have a niche for yourself, and then in 2 years, like that thing isn't a thing anymore, and you thought that these two pieces that came together in your skill set were really important. So there's also a lot of people just not doing that great work because the bar has been raised like so high over the past few years that people were doing really well before. Like if you guys are building really great modern designs that follow the stuff that we're talking about here, that do great wireframes that use InVision, you're going to be doing so much better than people who've been doing this for 10 years. I think that's really exciting. It's kind of scary. You may have heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, but basically, people who think they're really good at design aren't that good at design. People who think they're really bad at design don't realize that they've actually learned a lot, and it's just kind of wildness. A little bit about the business of design. The industry, working in design land is really different from academia. You probably already picked up on that a little bit from the startup stuff. There's a lot of things in common, like you have a problem that you're trying to solve. But it's a really different way of doing it. I think actually you'd be a really good person to talk to about this because you are much closer to farm logs and being in the university than I am. But there's a few things that like would be good to do and things that really don't apply. So here's things that you don't need to be a great designer. You don't even need a degree. You should have a degree. I feel like I recommend that you stay in school. But it's not strictly necessary. In fact, we do have people that work at farm logs who do very well without it. Focus on not the piece of paper, but like what you're learning while you're here. We'll talk a little bit about what I think you can get out of college while you're here if you want to get into this field. You don't need to have a lot of experience. You don't need that detailed a resume. You don't even need good grades. That's like the good news, or maybe not if you have any. These are the things that you definitely do need. Definitely, you just want to be like if you're the kind of person who sees the world and is always just annoyed at how these little things are wrong and you wish that they could be fixed. This is a great thing to do. If you really like to actually build cool shit instead of just talking about shit and actually make it yourself, this is for you. If you don't need a lot of structure, if you need a lot of structure to succeed, there's nothing wrong with that at all. If you don't need a lot of structure, or even you kind of hate it sometimes, this might be a good fit for you. Definitely more of a fit than other places because you get to help define that structure. And you have to be somebody who's like ready to keep shipping and ready to not say, okay, this is going to be the most beautiful thing ever. Trust me. We're going to build 3 years building like this awesome thing. 3 years is not an okay amount of time to spend building something. 3 months is not an okay amount of time to build something. 3 weeks is pushing it. This is from, Joel Spolsky, who's a tech writer. This is how he says to hire engineers. It's somebody who's smart and get things done. If you can demonstrate that, you're going to be doing well. The portfolio is the fundamental thing. Like I said, you didn't need a detailed resume. You need an awesome portfolio. It's quality over quantity to the extreme. This is a clip, actually, I didn't ask if I could use this or not, but this is a clip from a portfolio, or at least a blog entry I saw from somebody that was amazing. What's really interesting about this is that it doesn't have any pictures on it, which is kind of strange for a designer, but what's amazing about it is that this person breaks down the problem he's trying to solve in really clear terms. And it's very obvious to me that he's done the parts we talked about before. He's researched. He's got real insights on what the problems people are trying to solve are. He's gone through great workflows. There is later on like some images of some great animations that were done and some screenshots of the app. But this is a great portfolio as it is because he's really showing exactly what he learned. There's only one project in this portfolio, if you think about this as a portfolio, and that's totally fine as long as it's amazing. So if you have work that you're not sure is that good, don't put it in your portfolio. That's my advice. This is the resume thing again. I actually talked with Kirsten a little bit earlier, and we're trying to pinpoint exactly what I was trying to say about the resume thing because you do need a resume, and the only reason this worked is because I got lucky, and it was so early that we weren't actually, we hadn't built a great design or a great hiring process that Kirsten had built.
I will say though, a LinkedIn profile is comparable to a resume. So
LinkedIn is comparable to a resume. We've been talking a lot. We both have our voices on that show. I was talking to a few of you downstairs, I think. I think what I probably, hopefully told most of you is that, a resume is great, but that's sort of a tool that big companies use to figure out like who should fit where. And the rules that big companies have are basically there so that nothing that bad can happen. And resumes are sort of an example of that. Like Kirsten's also runs our HR, and I think we can say that there's sort of a similar thing there. Like HR can be a bummer in a lot of places. It's actually an amazing thing to have in a company if it's done with the thought and care and intelligence that Kirsten has brought to it. Resumes are sort of the same thing. The most important thing is demonstrating to me that you know how to solve these problems and do it in an awesome way, that you've done it, and it's great. It doesn't really matter what your experience has been. The problem with the resume format is that I can't really get to the essential thing I need to know about you, which is that you have done this and that you can do this, or that you care about this. Resume doesn't tell you that. And similarly, a lot of the things that big companies have, although they require you to get to a certain bar, they prevent you from doing the really awesome things. We had an interview with somebody, I won't mention the company, but it's a big company that you all know, who was doing an amazing job leading the team at that company, who just didn't fit with our company, with our hiring needs at all. This isn't for a design position, because they just didn't understand what needed to get done, and they couldn't demonstrate that they had done that. They were just sort of somebody who knew who to talk to and how to get that person to talk to someone else. And that is so fundamentally necessary in a big company and so not a thing in startups. So if you're trying to figure out how to distinguish yourself, focus on the actual stuff that you've done. Some people in this room might run a company already. I don't know. You might know that you want to be a founder, and that's awesome. Definitely do it. Some of you might be kind of scared by the fuck it, ship it, and saying to yourselves all right, you know what? I think I need a little bit more reliability. I want somewhere with a really nice, food for lunch every day. I don't think I want an experiment where the company can just crumble. That's not for me. If you're in the middle and you're not sure between, you're trying to bounce between crazy high risk of building a company yourself, which is extremely challenging, and not working for a startup, working for a small to medium-sized startup is an amazing experience. It's what I did. So there's no shortage of that out there. Pick something you're interested in. There's also a lot of accelerators that are great if you want to get in and build something yourself. Obviously, if you're a founder, they're also great places. There are a lot of companies that are looking to hire. There's also a lot of programs you can do design for the United States government and help improve stuff like that. One of the designers I worked for did a program called Hackstars, which basically helps people in Techstars build stuff. So there are a lot of really good options. I can talk to you a little bit more about that. Before you get into the career stuff, while you're here, what I would focus on is probably, maybe first and foremost, well, besides actually making cool stuff, is meeting the right people. The trifecta that we had at FarmWorks early on and that people tend to talk about is the hacker, the hustler, and the designer. Hacker meaning the technical person that can make anything they need to make. This is generally, we call them dragons jokingly in our office right now, but an amazing technical person. Brad is this person in FarmWorks, and he's just a genius. He can make anything. The hustler is the CEO, the business person, the leader, the visionary. This is our CEO, Jesse. Do you want this person to be determined without compromise ever? Sometimes I just think about Jesse quitting like working on a company just because it would be hilarious, because there's just no chance in the world that he's going down without like being like at the top of the mast of the ship. Like this person will take you through whatever you need to take you through. That's the kind of person you want to find. If you're a designer, you're generally the communicator, maybe the philosopher of product, an understander of people, and you design things obviously that are really great and people love to use. Everybody on your founding team should be sort of an architect and a philosopher about startups in general and willing to think through that stuff. Everybody should be willing to work with each other. Things not to care about are how much money they have, or if they've definitely done this before, or if they have friends who are venture capitalists, in my opinion. Scratch your own itch. This is the thing that I said was more important than even finding people. The doing of the stuff in the portfolio I told you about, it's not about the fact that you've demonstrated that you can do it. That's the only way to learn how to do cool stuff is to do it. Unlike academia, I think, where reading and talking about it is learning, this isn't really going to help you nearly as much, honestly, as maybe if you had spent this hour like making an awesome app. Maybe we should have done that. I don't know. But the way that people talk about it is that scratching your own itch, having an idea, and then like building something to solve that is going to get you through the learning of HTML and CSS, the learning of the design process, so much more than tutorials ever will, because you're building something that doesn't matter. This is actually an example that I built before I joined Pharmos. It's a typewriter that is like that you can just type and it works like a typewriter and sounds like a typewriter, and you can't backspace. But it's got a lot of JavaScript in it, and I just kind of wanted it to be a thing. I don't really know why. It was an amazing learning experience, and this is how I learned to write JavaScript. I still do side projects all the time. I encourage you to if you can. Similar to like scratching your own itch, this is the slogan of Y Combinator. Make something people want. I think this summarizes it really quickly. You actually have to make something. You have to make something that people actually care about. And when you're scratching your own itch, like try to design it around that. That said, I'm going to contradict everything I just said about scratching your own itch. Maybe. What I've seen a lot of people in your guys' position do in school is build things that are closest to them. Build things that are the immediate problems that they have. And so generally that means that there are a lot of like new photo sharing apps that people build as their first projects, and songs that like apps to share songs and music. There are people who build like dating apps to scratch their own itch because they want to find somebody to date. Apps to find like parties and stuff. And if that's what it's going to take to like get you to do great design and learn through that process, do it. Just seriously do it. And those are kind of saturated markets right now, but that doesn't matter. Like, you don't have to ship it. I mean, you actually should ship it immediately, but you don't have to. You don't really. Even just doing it is going to be so much better. A lot of the problems that people in startups have are the problems of young, well-to-do, like white dudes. A lot of the times, a lot of white dudes in startups. Hopefully, that's changing a lot more. But there are a lot of other people in the world that have problems that are real problems, like real problems. And technology can actually solve those problems, and it's doing a terrible job. You're not too late at all. Education. You guys are going to an amazing universities. If everybody in the world could have access to the kind of knowledge you have, that would change the world completely. I know I'm sounding like a startup bro right now, but that would be amazing. And there are people who are building them. I know you guys are quite familiar with things like Khan Academy or Coursera. Government, like everybody agrees that the government sucks generally, and there's a ton of things we could do to help fix that. Energy is massive. Healthcare is so bad, and there's a lot of things we can do to fix that. Agriculture is my favorite one right now because that's what we're actually working on. There are so few agriculture apps doing cool stuff. I mean, in the past few years, yeah, but if you can do something when you're scratching your own itch that actually will affect people's lives, just please, just do it, because you're going to be way more successful. People will think you're cooler, honestly, in the end. You'll actually change people's lives, and nobody here, I'm looking around, I guarantee you nobody here is too young to start a company. So don't just build like a starter app unless you actually think it's cool. Build something that you give a shit about. running a long time, so I'm going to run through these. The whole benefit of working for a startup is that you get to sit next to the CEO, and a lot of people do sit next to our CEO. He sits out in the room with everybody. The entire picture is there. Like Jake can tell you, like you get to see like everything, like even the dirty like stuff that breaks all the time, and of course it does. I think I tried to give you a bit about my background. Like I started a little late. I didn't learn to program until I was 25, and now I'm leading a design team that a third of farmers have signed up for. And I totally feel comfortable that without this company, I could go out and start another one, and I could do awesome stuff. I know how to build teams. Like the conversation we had on the plane today, I know how to hire. I know how to run this stuff. I've become so much more valuable to companies, if that's how you want to measure success, through in the first 3 months than I was the 3 years before my past job, because I get to see the entire thing. That's why you hear about small companies toppling big companies, and you're thinking, how the hell could that even happen? It's because everybody is so connected, and you just can't fit 300 people in a community where they're talking to each other all the time every day. So yeah, the risk and reward thing I talked about, remember I said that was BS? Like, it is bull. The risk is almost none, especially if you're young, if you don't have a family. If you have a job offer from another big company, they'll probably just still hire you in 3 months if you turn them down and explain why. The reward, you're probably not going to get rich. If you're in the startups for the money, there's way better fields to be in if you just want to make shit ton of money. The thing that will reward, that you'll be rewarded by, is visibility, the ability to lead people, because everybody who works at a startup is generally leading people within a few months because they're growing at the right rates. You just have to hire that many people. You saw like how our growth went at the beginning. If your parents get nervous about this or something, just tell them that all the big companies are laying off people anyway. Okay, a couple small things. Startups are nuts, right? Like, there are no rules, so if you do need structure in place, I'm not going to tell you to do it. But if you want to like go crazy and take big risks, now is an amazing time in your life to do it. Wilson, actually, I talked to him the other day, and I was asking him about this, and he said that, as soon as you graduate, it's just generally a time in people's lives when they do things that are a little bit more boring than they're used to, and that they will do. There's like this dead zone that I definitely did. You can skip this just as long as you're willing to take the risk. And for the next 5 or 10 years, it could be difficult. I moved across the country once with friends, and then again from the West Coast to Michigan with people I had met 2 weeks beforehand. And I've never regretted it for a single moment, but just acknowledge to yourself that if you do find yourself in a position where you have an opportunity to live somewhere you didn't think you'd be living, to work with a company that doesn't have that much runway or that much profit, if this sounds at all appealing to you, please just go for it, live the adventure. You will learn so much, and you don't want to have spent 3 years at like Facebook 3 years from now, drinking like really nice coffee and eating really nice food, building like tools for their advertising people to help sell something to some like random thing out in the world, and realizing that you didn't actually learn that much, and that you have no idea how to start a company, and that you don't know what you're doing, and you wouldn't know what you're doing if you left Facebook. We're pretty close to done. These are some things that I would call must-reads if you want like some follow-up stuff. Paul Graham is the guy I was mentioning before. His essays are on startups. They're in a really ugly format, but they're all amazing. Just print them all out and read through them all. Hacker News and Designer News are things I read every day. If you're interested in startups generally, Hacker News is that's where I found my job. It's on job posting on Hacker News. Designer News, if you want to get into the design scene, this is where like the cool kids hang out. Design of Everyday Things is a book by Donald Norman, who's a classic UX dude. It's just like what a designer is, 101. Don't Make Me Think is a little bit more about usability testing and how to build apps that are legit. And Pattern Language is a book about architecture that has nothing to do with product design, but the way that it's written is looks like just fundamental to the way I think about things, and I'd really recommend it to you too. This is my contact information. This is our jobs page. We are definitely hiring UX designers, visual designers, people who have experience building awesome products for internships, for full-time positions. I'll be here tomorrow. I'd love to talk to you guys. We have a few minutes for question now. but try to build with purpose. Try to run experiments as much as you can, and keep the faith that taking big risks, especially at this age, is going to pay off for something crazy. That's it. I only left about 3 minutes for questions, but I'll be around tomorrow. Does anybody have any?
How do you evaluate designers?
What's that?
How do you evaluate designers?
That's an awesome question. This is something we sort of did like casually at first, and we actually have put together a process with Pearson. Actually, it's so convenient that you're here. We go through a number of points. It's going to be a little bit different for an intern than it would be for a full-time person. But the fundamental thing is, does their work show that they have an understanding of a real problem that people have? One. Does the result that they've come out with solve that problem, first and foremost? And secondly, in an elegant, beautiful way that's as simple as possible. There's also a visual design component to it. Like, I do want you to make things that are beautiful, and if you're going to be hired as a full-time product designer, you do have to have that ability. I don't know that that's something I would tell you to learn, because I don't even know if it's something you do learn. It takes practice. So there's definitely a gut call based on that. The way the hiring process goes is we'll generally have a screen with you to figure out like what your motivation is, why you're a designer. Then we'll have another hour-long conversation about the portfolio and have you walk me through the things that you did and why you did them. And then if it's a full-time hire, we will bring you into the office, have like what we call a hack day, where you actually do a design with us for the day. You are given a problem, and we get to see how you think and work together with you on the problem and have you present what your work was at the end of the day. I did a whole hack weekend when I started. Basically, you just show up and start working, and at the end of the day, we see how we did. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Yeah.
So you talked a lot about doing research and having that drive decisions.
Yeah.
But there's still, I mean, I'm not a designer, but I see that a lot of designers make some subjective decisions.
Yes.
And so first of all, what percentage of subjectiveness would you say plays into any decision? And how do you develop a better subjective feel for how things should be?
Yeah. So we'll tackle the second one first. I don't know how to develop a better feel. I think, designers are like the artists of startups, and if anybody here like is an artist or works in that realm, like how to develop a certain taste is just something I can't even, like, I don't know. Like, I don't even know if you can. Exposure to great stuff is the best thing I can tell you. So don't go Google like great design history, like, a bunch of like Swiss posters that they made back in the day is not really going to help you here. Go to designer news every day and see the things that were upvoted and see why people like them and see the shit that people talk about in people's designs and try to make a decision for yourself. Balancing subjectivity and research. Because startups move so fast, you have to be you don't have a lot of like, the bar for understanding decision is just, honestly, it's low. You do have to just make gut calls all of the time. And sometimes you'll ask somebody like, why did we do that? And they said, gut call. And you're like, okay, but you kind of have to trust that they have an understanding of what the problem was. So the subjective things we do are understanding patterns of user interfaces. So where buttons live, it matters, and there's some things you can do to research how that works. There's some really basic user experience things like Fit's Law, show you how to arrange that stuff. See me after if you want some more resources on that. The subjective stuff is just also to deal with like color and typeface, and there's a lot you can do to research there. The important part to do research on is, what is the problem that this person has? The interaction we have is, what problem is going to be defined for design? We help inform that, and we have ownership of how we're going to solve that problem. So when you're talking user land, that's where we do research.
How do you evaluate the success of your designs? Are there certain metrics or factors that you consider?
Man, awesome question. The usability testing I showed with the video with the watermark is one. What people think of them generally is two. The primary one is that they exist in an ecosystem of product overall, so that the tests and the metrics we have for how people are using the product, we have like metrics built into our entire system so that we can see who's using what where. those are really help answer the questions if the design is working, also if the app is fast enough, and just hearing from users. If the number on that chart that I showed at the very beginning keeps going up and up, generally design is working. Overall, if you know the answer to that question, tell me. I would love to know. That's like my best guess, but we're actually working on that right now, how we can best do that, because in a team of 3 or 4 or 5 designers, knowing like whose work is actually having an impact, it's going to be really hard to actually figure that out. Yeah.
So when you go out and give something, a product to some farmers,
Yeah.
how do you keep connected with them? Or do you kind of like check in with them a lot, or you ask them for feedback written? Do you go and talk to them?
There's a couple different phases. There's like the initial research phase where you talk to people to figure out what the problem is. Then you go into your hole, do the generation thing, which is like the core competency we have of building the thing, and then you evaluate, is that working for people? And there are other teams that do that as well. So at the very beginning, oftentimes we have this customer success team that will get requests from farmers, with contact support. One thing we do just to cheat is to say, who's asked for this feature? And then email them and say, hey, this feature you asked for like 2 months ago, we're building it. Can you hop on the phone with us? Also, if we know who this feature is targeting, they don't know that they want it yet, but we think they will want it. There's a lot of other teams that have, we can run queries against their database and see if it has certain attributes. And we also have personal relationships with farmers that are sort of our archetypes, people that are always talking to us, and we always, we all know by name. And then, once the product is released, it's watching the metrics, it's hearing from the customer success team how that feature is performing. And what we should be doing more of is more like ethnographic research, where we go out there and actually observe the things being used and detect it, based off of some maybe heuristics we set up, whether or not the goals that we thought the design was going to be are actually observed.
And are you able to, do most of the people that you kind of debate, that kind of work with you, do they give you access to their data afterwards, or not? Do you have that kind of like thing that you can share your data with me or not?
Are you talking about the farmers? Do I have their data? So, it's spooky. We can just see anything we want about anybody really in our system. That's no different from any other startup. There are rules that we have in place about who can do what, but generally, if we want to see something, we can ask them. If it's something that is on the aggregate level, like it's something that we want to know from a whole, we can just go and do it. Honestly, the usage metrics are no different than they would be in any other company, where you can observe how many times things have been done. So that's one thing about technology. It's really powerful what you can do and see in terms of your usage patterns. Keep that in mind when you're using other apps. People are watching you as you use what you're using. Anything else? Cool. I think we should wrap up anyway. Thank you. Like I said, I'll be around tomorrow, 11:15 to 11:50, in small group conversations too. So stop by if you have more questions.